publicly, poetically, and permanently. As we walked back toward the cabin, the control remote buzzed gently in my pocket, a quiet pulse of readiness. The stage was set, the weather forecast was clean, and the batteries were charged. Karen had taken her final selfie at sunset, wrapped in fairy lights and dripping entitlement. She didn't know it yet, but by tomorrow, the ground under her would shift, literally. I glanced at the boathouse one last time before closing the door for the night. "Let's see how she likes a sunrise cruise," I said aloud, and Max thumped his tail in agreement. The lake was still dark when I woke up. The stars were just beginning to fade into the lavender bleed of dawn, and the cool morning air slipped through the cracks of the window screen. I didn't make coffee. I didn't eat. I didn't pet Max. I just walked to the shed, opened the thick wooden drawer that still smelled faintly of grease and pine, and pulled out the remote control like I was unsheathing an old sword. My hand hovered over the surface, fingertips skimming the rubber casing, feeling every familiar groove and button. I had designed this system to survive flash floods and tornado winds, to keep gear safe and dry during the worst that nature could offer. Never in my life did I imagine I'd use it against a woman who once tried to fine me for having a clothesline. But here we were. I slipped out the back, moving along the edge of the ridge trail where the pine trees grew thick and shielded me from lake view. The drone feed was live on my phone, positioned high in the sycamore just behind my cabin. It showed the boathouse in perfect clarity, bathed in string lights that were still twinkling faintly against the last of the night sky. Karen was asleep in a recliner near the center of the structure, wrapped in a blanket with cartoon owls on it, her phone on her chest, earbuds still in place. An empty wine bottle lay sideways on the floor next to her. On the far end, a faux bamboo yoga mat was curled up by the wind, and a citronella candle flickered low beside it. This was what she'd turned my invention into, a floating pajama party. Max was up now, sitting by the door, tilting his head at me like he knew something was about to happen. I gave him a wink and activated the first sequence. The boathouse shifted almost imperceptibly at first. The pontoons adjusted their depth, just enough to take some of the tension off the dock hinges. Hydraulic struts lifted gently, loosening the tension in the support bracket. The motors engaged at 3% capacity, pushing against the soft current of the lake with all the elegance of a swan's first glide. The dock line I had attached years ago as a backup was rigged to a tension-release bolt, which snapped clean with a sound no louder than a stick breaking. The boathouse was officially unmoored. Back in the drone feed, Karen stirred slightly. The camera showed her adjusting the blanket and rolling onto her side, unaware that she was now at the mercy of my controls. I increased motor power to 6%, just enough to move the boathouse away from the dock slowly, like a leaf drifting downstream. The lake accepted it without a sound. The current was mild, and my system handled the steering with a precision I had spent years perfecting. For a while, I just walked along the edge of the trail, tracking the movement from both real-life and drone angle, marveling at how cleanly everything was working. The structure looked almost ethereal in the half-light of morning, drifting like a dream that didn't belong. About 15 minutes in, the first ripple of awareness finally hit her. She sat up slowly, stretching, looking around. I zoomed in on her face. She seemed puzzled, eyes narrowing as she scanned the shoreline. She picked up her phone, looked at it, then back at the water, and stood. I clicked a button that dropped the retractable rudder half a foot deeper into the water, stabilizing the drift. The boathouse was now over 50 yards from the dock, inching toward the far tree-covered bend of the lake where mosquitoes were known to congregate in dense, humming clouds. She walked toward the edge and leaned over, peering into the water like she expected an answer to rise up from the depth. Then her head snapped toward the cabin. I stood still, behind the trees, out of sight. Max let out a low growl from the porch, but I silenced him with a quick hand. Karen suddenly began shouting. I couldn't hear her from this distance, but I saw the posture, the wide arm gestures, the frantic look around the boat for her phone, her keys, something to explain or undo what was happening. She ran to the edge and waved her arms at a passing canoeist, who clearly had no idea what to make of the woman screaming from a floating structure in the middle of the lake. He paddled faster and disappeared behind the bend. Karen then tried to power on her speaker system, possibly to broadcast her demands, but I had already disabled the internal battery relay the night before. She stomped her foot and vanished from view for a moment, probably tripping over the folded beach umbrella she had wedged between two deck chairs. I activated the next phase, shifting the structure gently eastward, guiding it toward the oldest part of the lake where lily pads grew so thick they sometimes confused the local duck population. The boathouse turned slowly, obediently, like a well-trained horse. Karen emerged again, now holding her phone high, yelling into it as if reception could fix her predicament. I knew she would be calling the sheriff again. I had already texted Holden earlier, giving him a heads-up. He replied with nothing but a thumbs-up emoji and a single word: popcorn. I increased the thrust slightly to 8%. The boat picked up just enough speed to be noticeable now. Karen held the railing with both hands as she tried to brace herself. She looked down at the water and then up at the sky, visibly panicking. She darted inside, probably thinking she'd find some kind of emergency switch, but all she'd find was a locked fuse panel and waterproof storage cases that hadn't been opened in years. I could only imagine the expression on her face as she opened drawers filled with nautical charts, military-grade lashing cords, and Coast Guard maintenance manuals. I let the boathouse drift for another half-hour, then slowly guided it toward the edge of the cove, where the thick reeds grew high and the bugs were relentless. There was a small, mucky inlet there, the kind that attracted frogs the size of grapefruits and spiders that made fishermen nervous. I dropped anchor using the remote, locking the platform into place with an audible splash I could hear even from the shore. Karen came out again, swatting at the air, visibly sweating, frantically pacing the deck like someone stuck on an elevator between floors. She tried flagging down a neighbor in a rowboat, but he simply shrugged and paddled away, clearly aware of the neighborhood drama. Word travels fast in HOA territory. I watched from the trail as the sun finally broke fully over the treetops, casting long golden rays across the lake and bathing the floating boathouse in warm, mocking light. It looked like a painting, if the painter had a cruel sense of irony. Karen, the self-declared queen of community wellness, now stranded in a bug-filled swamp at the edge of a lake she thought she controlled. It was almost too perfect. I checked the drone battery, still at 70%, and made a mental note to charge the backup just in case. I wanted this documented from every angle. By the time Karen had realized she was on a fully functioning, remote-controlled watercraft, she had moved past outrage and into something far more entertaining: panic management. After she screamed into the void and threw a cushion at the drone, she made one last attempt to reach someone, anyone, by climbing onto the roof hatch and waving her phone in all directions like she was guiding in a helicopter. I zoomed in through the drone lens and watched her try every trick in the HOA playbook: calls, complaints, even what looked like a fake fainting spell for dramatic effect. But it was too early and too remote. The lake's far cove where she was anchored didn't get strong reception, and no one nearby seemed eager to help. She had burned too many bridges with her neighbors, most of whom had their own stories of her outrageous fines, loud threats, or unsolicited HOA inspections. Watching her squirm now, I couldn't help but think about poetic justice and how sweet it tasted when served on a slow-drifting platform covered in citronella candles and delusion. By mid-morning, she tried taking matters into her own hands. I watched through the drone feed as she opened one of the lower compartments in the boathouse and began rifling through my emergency tool bin. She pulled out a rust-proof wrench and started clumsily banging on the panel that housed the control unit. That particular panel, however, was locked tight with a steel frame and an encrypted latch that required a code only I knew, because I built it. She yanked, twisted, and cursed, her robe now streaked with dirt and lake scum. Eventually, she gave up and threw the wrench across the deck, where it bounced and nearly hit one of her potted plants. I made a mental note to add, unauthorized wrench attack, to my hypothetical lawsuit notes if it ever came to that. Later in the day, I noticed another figure approaching the dock on shore. A teenager, maybe 17 or 18, with a backpack and a DSLR camera. He was one of the neighborhood kids, the kind who'd been building drones and editing videos long before his teachers figured out what he was capable of. He spotted me sitting on the bench overlooking the lake and walked up grinning. "Hey, Mr. Talbot," he said, pulling out a phone. "Is it true you remote-jacked the boathouse? People are saying it floated off by itself, but someone posted footage of you with a controller." I chuckled and shrugged. "Let's just say it's going where it needs to go." The kid looked back at the floating speck in the distance and nodded, clearly thrilled. "This is going viral already. Want me to make a full video edit for you? I can throw in slow-mo, a heroic soundtrack, maybe even a countdown timer overlay." I laughed harder than I had in weeks. "You do that," I said. "But make sure you tag it with HOA Justice. That'll sting the right people." Karen, meanwhile, was losing her grip. Her phone battery had died sometime after noon, and without it, she was untethered from her only weapon, digital outrage. I could see her pacing the deck like a lion in a cage, pausing only to swat flies or scream across the water in vain. Eventually, I decided to give her a break. Not because I felt sorry for her, but because the next part of the plan needed daylight. I activated the motors again and began the slow process of returning the boathouse, not to its original dock, but to the opposite side of the lake, where a shallow sandbar made it impossible for traditional boats to access without getting stuck. The wind was mild, the water flat. The platform moved silently, like a ghost ship with a confused, barefoot monarch aboard. By the time she realized she was moving again, we were nearly halfway across. She scrambled to gather her things, tossing the potted plants into a crate, rolling up her yoga mat, and shoving her bedding into a duffel bag with frantic energy. It was like watching someone pack for an escape from a party they weren't invited to. When the boathouse finally grounded on the sandbar with a soft scraping noise, she jumped off before the structure even settled and immediately stepped ankle-deep into thick, sludgy sand. She shrieked, lost a flip-flop, and dropped her bag, which tumbled into the water and soaked half her stuff. I watched from across the lake, sipping lemonade and feeling like I was at an outdoor theater with the best seat in the house. Soon enough, the sheriff showed up. I had sent him a text a couple of hours earlier letting him know that the mobile unit had completed its HOA eviction exercise. He pulled up in his patrol truck, parked near the edge of the sandbar, and rolled down the window. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I could read the body language. Karen pointed wildly at the boathouse, at the sky, then at me from across the lake, her hands flapping like a deranged conductor. The sheriff didn't move. He just leaned out with his coffee mug and waited for her tantrum to finish. Then he pulled a clipboard from his dash and handed her a copy of the county's zoning documentation. The same paperwork I had updated last year when I registered the boathouse as a Class II watercraft. She looked down at the form like it was written in an alien language, her expression turning from rage to something dangerously close to dread. When she finally returned to the HOA office that afternoon, she was covered in mud, missing one shoe, and dragging a soggy duffel bag like a defeated war general. But her pride wouldn't let her go quietly. I heard from a neighbor later that she stormed into the HOA board meeting and demanded that I be fined for misuse of community structures and harboring advanced surveillance equipment. She even claimed I had installed some kind of naval-grade sonar to spy on lakefront residents. One of the board members asked her plainly, "Whose name is on the boathouse deed?" That's when the real cracks started to show. Karen produced a stack of papers, maps, and half-baked arguments about boundary lines and communal easements, but the board, most of whom had seen the viral video by now, wasn't buying it. They asked why she had set up what looked like a private yoga spa in someone else's floating structure, and why she was charging retreat fees to other residents. When she couldn't answer, things got quiet. That kind of silence in